2002 through 2007 Honda Accord with the 2.4 liter engine starter replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the starter. So the labor time on this is about 2 hours, but we can do this in about 20-25 minutes doing it in the techniques I'm about to show you. I wanted to share with you the part numbers to let you know that there will be links for them in the description of the video along with the tools. The first thing you're going to want to do is disconnect the negative battery cable and then tuck it off to the side. That way it doesn't come back in contact. Then we're going to remove the top engine cover here. It's just held on with 2 acorn nuts. They're 10 millimeters. Take the 2 nuts off and then you're going to lift the cover straight up. And it has a little rubber grommet also holding it on. Then you can set it aside. So in the next step, we need to take the intake plenum off and remove it, but we're going to leave everything connected. Air box, hoses, vacuum lines, switches, everything will be connected to it. We're not going to disconnect any of that. We're just going to remove the bolts and fasteners. To get the fasteners off, I'm using a 12 millimeter socket with a little extension, and I'm using my Milwaukee cordless ratchet here. This makes quick work of this. This is not necessary or needed, but if you have these, I recommend using them. If you haven't seen them, I recommend checking them out. I'll link it up in the description. So you're going to remove the 5 fasteners starting next to the throttle body and working your way towards the passenger side of the vehicle. So you're going to run across 3 bolts and 2 nuts when you take these fasteners off. Since we disconnected the negative battery cable, we're going to need to reset the clock. So I'll show you how to do that later on in the video. Now that we got all the fasteners for the plenum unbolted, there's one more support bracket we need to unbolt. If you follow down here, you'll see this black bracket. You follow down and you remove the 12 millimeter bolt there. To get to that, you can just flex the radiator hose slightly out of your way and you can get to that fastener and take that out. Once you got that removed, now you can just pull the plenum straight towards the radiator and angle it off to the side like this. Now you can see how much room you got in here to get to the starter. Now to hold the plenum out of our way, I just used a bungee cord, wrapped it around the filler neck of the radiator and hooked it back on here, and that held it out of the way. There's not a whole lot of pressure on it, so you don't have to worry about breaking the radiator off. Now we can get to the electrical connectors here on the starter. You can pull off the signal wire here. Now we need to peel the rubber boot back that's holding the main power wire on here. So you're going to peel that rubber boot back, and then underneath is going to be a 12 millimeter nut. The wire loom here will be clipped onto a little bracket, and then we're also going to unplug the knock sensor here by squeezing the tab and pulling the knock sensor connector off like this. And then once you get this all unbolted, this stuff will all flip out of our way. To make it a little easier to work with, I'm going to remove these 2 vacuum lines here, so I'm just going to pull them off. One you pull off the port like this, and then the second one you just pop it out of its little bracket that it's held into, and you can push it off the side, and that makes it easier to get your hands down there to work, and also to get to this little electrical connector or wire loom holder here. You just squeeze the little tabs on the side, and then once you've got it squeezed, you just give it a little push, and that'll make it pop out of the wire loom holder here. Now using a 12 millimeter wrench, we're going to unscrew the main power feed. You want to make sure that negative cable there is disconnected. It will arc out right here if you don't do that. So we can pop this little rubber boot back, and once you get the boot popped back, you can use a 12 millimeter wrench, and then you can crack the nut free and spin that off. Now you can take the wiring and just tuck it off out of your way. Now this long, funny looking bolt here, we're going to remove this one here. It's a 14 millimeter. I'm just using a 14 millimeter semi-deep socket with a flex head ratchet here. And it's a straight ratchet. It made it easiest to get in here using a straight flex head ratchet. You put it on the fastener, and now that you're on the fastener at an angle here, you should be able to just pull straight upwards, and that'll loosen the fastener. And most of the times what I've run across is once you get this crack free, a couple threads with the ratchet, then usually you can stick your hand back there and you can spin the rest of the fastener out by hand. If you live in the Rust Belt or somewhere where there's a lot of corrosion, you may have to, ratchet it all the way out. To the larger 17 millimeter bolt down here in the bottom, what I do is I use a 17 millimeter socket with a wobbly like this, and I use about a 3-foot long extension. This is all 1/2 inch drive. If you use 3/8, you can do it, but it flexes a lot and it's a lot harder to get off. So you can see how I angle it down in there and I work on it out here. I'm using a pretty long 1/2 inch drive ratchet here. The longer, the more leverage you have to crack that bolt free. It can be really tight and tough. So once you crack it free, a few threads, just like the bottom ones, you usually be able to spin them out by hand. If not, you can switch over to a power tool And that's exactly what I did. I used my little, I switched over to a 3/8 wobbly with an extension, and I'm using my little impact gun here. This is the stubby impact gun. It allows you to get in these tight areas and spin that fastener out. The reason why I switched over is because the bolt has a lot of threads and it takes forever doing it by hand. Now that you got the fastener removed, you can go ahead and reach down here and start pulling the starter out. Just take your time not to snag it on anything and just pull it out just like this. Now we're ready to reinstall our new replacement starter. So you're going to slide it straight back into position exactly the way we took it out. Stab it into the hole on the bell housing. Once you got it stabbed in there, then I recommend you start both bolts by hand. So you're going to take both bolts and spin them in by hand. And then what I do is I'll switch over to a power tool and I'll run the bottom bolt in first. So you start both bolts. Once the bottom bolt is run in and pretty much just snug, we're going to torque it down in a second. But what I'm going to do is do the top bolt here. I'm going to run it down by hand and tighten it up by hand. There's not a lot of room to get torque wrenches and stuff back here and get an accurate torque on it. So I just tighten them down by hand until they're good and snug. You kind of use the gauge of how tight they were when you took it off to how tight you put it back on. So you tighten the top bolt first. And then now that the top bolt's tight, now I switch back over to my ratchet here with the wobbly with the 1/2" drive, and I'll tighten it, or I'll finally snug it up with the hand ratchet. And basically, I put it as tight as how I felt it come off. Now we're gonna hook up all the electrical connectors. So we're gonna put the main power feed on, plug in the knock sensor, plug in the wire loom holder, and also plug in the smaller solenoid wire. When you're putting the fastener back on to tighten up the main power cable here, you want to tighten it up until it's snug and about a quarter turn. You don't want a whole lot of pressure on it. It's made out of brass and it can break off easily on the starter. So just snug it up until there's no play left in the cable. While you're down here, you can also plug the vacuum lines back in that we took off, back onto the port and back into their little holders. And then we're going to swap out the gasket here. So I've reused these gaskets before in the past, but I don't recommend it. They do leak. So that's why I'm replacing it with a new one. And I recommend you do the same. And this is the part number here. I'll link this up in the description of the video also. So we'll slip on our brand new plenum gasket here. Remove our bungee cord, and then we can go ahead and push the intake in, or the plenum inwards a little bit. Now we can plug the vacuum lines on the ports down below and make sure that they're re-secured. Now we're ready to slip the plenum back over the studs here. So you'll slide it on into position. Make sure the hose here is not tucked underneath it, and then slide it on. And now I recommend you start all the fasteners by hand. So that's what I do. I start all bolts by hand. So there's going to be 3 bolts and 2 nuts up here on the top of the plenum here. And then we're going to go down below and start the 1 bolt that held the bracket at the bottom of the manifold. To make things go faster, I use my Milwaukee cordless tool here to run all the fasteners in until they're snug. I'm not torquing them down with the tool. I'm just running them in until they touch. And if you notice, I started in the middle and I went left, right, in a crisscross pattern until all the fasteners were drawn in until they're snug. And then once they're all drawn in and snug, we're going to switch over to a torque wrench and we're going to torque this down. Don't forget to tighten the bottom bolt down there. You can go ahead and tighten that one all the way down. So now we're going to set up our torque wrench to 16 foot-pounds. The torque on it is pretty low, so we're going to torque this down to 16 foot-pounds. We're going to start in the middle again, and we'll torque this one down. Then we're going to do the same thing. We're going in a crisscross pattern, so I went to the left here. Once that one's torqued, then I went back right. Now I'm going to go back left, torque this one down, and then go far right here and torque this one down, all at 16 foot-pounds. Now that the intake plenum is torqued back down, we can take the top engine cover and line it up with the little studs on here and the little rubber grommet, and then give it a little press to seat the rubber grommet. And then once you get that done, you can go ahead and start the 2 acorn nuts, and you can just snug these up. And just as a reminder, I will link up all the parts and tools I use in this video in the description. Now that we got the top cover bolted up, we're going to take the negative cable and go ahead and reinstall that and tighten that up. And then we're going to fire this sucker off and make sure everything works. And we're also going to reset the clock, and I'll walk you through the steps of doing that. Now that we got a starting and running vehicle, we need to reset the clock before you send it back to the customer or for yourself. And to do that, we're going to press the sound button here and hold it until you hear an audible beep. Once you hear an audible beep, then you're going to use the number 4 and number 5 here to adjust your hour and minutes. So number 4 here will adjust the hour. Once you get that set, then you move over to the minutes, set your minutes. Once you got them both set to where you like, you just push the sound button one more time, and the clock is set. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.